Welcome to 10-Minute Physiology. In today's video, we're going to be talking about the parts of the central nervous system. So with that, let's give it a go. So what are the different parts of the central nervous system? So the central nervous system is going to contain basically 5 different areas. First is the telencephalon, the second is the cerebellum, the third is the diencephalon, the fourth is the brainstem, and then the fifth is going to be the spinal cord. So in this video, we're going to talk about each of these 5 areas in a lot of detail. We're going to start off with the telencephalon, which is represented by this area in this figure. So let's talk about the telencephalon in a little bit more detail. So what are the parts of the telencephalon? So the telencephalon is going to be made up of both hemispheres of the cerebral cortex, the corpus callosum, basal ganglia, globus pallidus, amygdala, as well as the hippocampal formation. Now what we're going to look at in a little more detail is the different lobes of the cerebral cortex. So if we were to look at the cerebral cortex, it is divided into 4 main lobes. The first lobe is going to be the frontal lobe. And the frontal lobe is going to be the largest lobe of the cerebral cortex. And it's going to be in charge of memories, emotion, personality, decision-making, and motor control. Now the frontal lobe is going to contain a lot of important parts. Some important parts are going to be the prefrontal cortex, Broca's area, the middle and inferior frontal gyrus, the premotor cortex, and the orbitofrontal cortex. The next lobe that we're going to look at is the occipital lobe. So the occipital lobe is going to be primarily used to decode visual signals, and it contains the primary visual cortex. In addition, we also have the parietal lobe. So the parietal lobe is going to be responsible for integrating information from our senses and focusing our attention on important things in the environment. The parietal lobe is particularly important for somatosensation and proprioception, and it's going to integrate information from the occipital lobe to reflect the location of objects in our visual field with touch and body position. The parietal lobe is going to include a very important structure called the somatosensory cortex. So that's the parietal lobe. Another lobe that's going to be important is the temporal lobe. So the temporal lobe is going to be an area that contains several important regions, including Wernicke's area, as well as the primary auditory cortex. So those are the main lobes of the cerebral cortex: the frontal lobe, temporal lobe, parietal lobe, and occipital lobe. So now that we talked about the telencephalon, let's talk about the second area of the central nervous system, the cerebellum. So what does the cerebellum do? So the cerebellum is going to contain around 50% of all central nervous system neurons, and it's going to receive input from nearly every type of receptor in the nervous system. Now the cerebellum can be divided into 3 parts. The first part is the vestibulocerebellum. This is going to be closely related to the vestibular system and therefore help maintain balance. The spinal cerebellum is going to receive input from muscle stretch receptors and therefore help regulate muscle tone. And then the last part of the cerebellum is the cerebrocerebellum. This is going to be the largest portion of the cerebellum, and it receives information from sensory motor portions of the cortex, and it's going to be responsible for coordinating motor behavior. So that is the function of the cerebellum. So the third area that's part of the central nervous system is going to be the diencephalon. So the diencephalon is going to be represented by this structure here on this figure. So what does the diencephalon do? The diencephalon, first of all, is going to consist of 3 different structures. The first is the thalamus, the second is the subthalamus, and then the third is the hypothalamus. So the thalamus is going to be the main integration center for sensory information that goes to the cortex. The thalamus is also going to be important for the control of arousal and certain aspects of memory function. Now the thalamus, along with the subthalamus, receives input from the basal ganglia that are important for motor function. And the input to the thalamus from the cerebellum to the thalamus is important for motor control. So the hypothalamus is another important structure of the diencephalon, and this structure has many different functions. First of all, neurons in this region can synthesize certain hormones and transport them to the posterior pituitary. Other neurons in this region synthesize and releasing hormones into the portal system, which then travel to the anterior pituitary. The hypothalamus also has specialized areas for controlling body temperature, hunger, thirst, and the cardiovascular system, and the hypothalamus is going to be the main control center of the autonomic nervous system. So those are the functions of the diencephalon. So now let's talk about the fourth area of the central nervous system, the brainstem. And the brainstem is going to contain three different parts. This is going to include the midbrain, the pons, as well as the medulla. So let's talk about each of these different regions. So the brainstem consists of the midbrain, pons, and medulla. So the midbrain is going to be a region that has neurons that control eye movement, motor control, and neurons that are involved with relaying signals related to hearing and vision. The pons is going to be a region that has neurons that control mastication or chewing, eye movement, and facial muscles. It also receives information from the face, scalp, mouth, and nose, and it's also going to be involved in processing information that is related to hearing and equilibrium. And it's also crucial for coordinating motor movements. The last part of the brainstem is going to be the medulla. It is going to contain neurons that innervate the muscles of the neck, and along with the pons, it is involved in controlling blood pressure, heart rate, respiration, and digestion. It is also the first central nervous system way station for information traveling from hearing and equilibrium. So those are the three main regions of the brainstem and their functions. So now let's talk about the last region of the central nervous system, which is going to be the spinal cord. And the spinal cord has a cervical region, a thoracic region, a lumbar region, and a sacral region. So let's talk about the spinal cord. So the spinal cord consists of 31 segments that each have a motor and sensory nerve root. These nerve roots combine to form 31 bilaterally symmetrical pairs of spinal nerves. The spinal roots, nerves, and ganglia are all part of the peripheral nervous system. Now, sensory information from different regions of the body enter the spinal cord through the dorsal roots, whereas ventral roots take information from the spinal cord and send it out to the rest of the body. Information can also travel to more rostral areas of the central nervous system through ascending tracts, and information can travel from the cortex and brainstem by descending tracts. So that's it for this video. I hope this video helped you understand the different parts of the central nervous system, and I hope to see you in the next video. Thank you for watching, and I hope to see you next time.